Slow fade out. So, hey everybody. I'm joined here by Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and we're both here rocking the Embroidery Nerd. And today we're going to be talking about utilizing stock files to make dynamic sports design. I really like it when the title fits all the way across the top of the screen so I can read it.
There you go.
Sometimes it's like not, and I can't really tell what it is.
I just noticed that it was there.
Yeah. There you go. They introduced new layouts too, Justin, so we can actually customize the layout however we want, which is really, really cool. So I was playing with it earlier. Don't tell Justin, but new layout.
Nice.
It's the little things in life that make me happy. But a couple announcements before we get too far. We are actually running the Embroidery Nerd shirt sales today. It is at shirts.theembroider.com. Hopefully that's right. If not, we'll find out. But it is at shirts.theembroidery.nerd.com, and we are running the shirt sales, which is we did the design live last week or 2 weeks ago.
Last week, I think, yeah. Or no, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, yeah.
2 weeks ago. So we did that design live 2 weeks ago, and now the shirt orders are up. Justin's company is running them. My mind went blank. Aztec Printing.
Aztec Embroidery and Screen Printing, yeah.
Yeah, that company's running them. And so we do get a little bit off the top of the shirts, kind of like the sports and clubs deals that you guys run. So we'll be getting a little bit off that. It helps us keep the lights on, helps us keep the show going, and enjoy all the chaos. So
exactly.
We don't have a ton of people joining us yet. You know, in the Midwest, there's storms running through here, and it's there's a lot of people that are hovering in their basements. Luckily, my studio's in the basement. So we'll be live until the internet cuts off. But we have Miss Cindy King joining us. Good evening. Still at work printing signs tonight. Y'all have fun. And we have Suzanne joining us as well. Hello, Suzanne. And the rest of the comments are mine. So far, at least. We'll see if they all load. But we can talk a little bit about what kind of prompted this. You know, there's school designs that are coming out right now. School sports are coming in. And so it's trying to get the mileage out of the designs that you have with some stock sports stock files to where you can add names and numbers and get those out to the sports teams. So
yeah, exactly. So I mean, a lot of people have their stock designs, whether you're purchasing just kind of generic sports designs. A lot of times, if I'm digitizing designs over the years, if there's something super generic like a ball in it, I'll just kind of save it in a folder saying, you know what, I may need this down the line. But you know, there's so many different ways that you can utilize these designs and different layouts and text and stuff like that. So you can definitely hit those spring sports, whether it's, you know, local leagues, schools, whatnot. So
awesome.
Different ways of using it.
Yep. And so Justin's up for the punishment first today. He's going to be pulling up his screen and going through a little bit in Wilcom, and then I'm going to pull up Pulse, and we're going to go a little bit through Pulse as well, just to kind of show the different options. So while Justin pulls that up, we have Shauna Lee joining us from Manitoba, Canada. So she is a nerd from the north, just like Mr. Mike Muldowney. I think we need to do a shirt run in Canada that just says Nerds of the North.
We need to, yes.
And we'll have maybe we'll see it. We'll voluntold Mike that he can run. Maybe we'll see. It's out there. I'll bug Mike and see what he says about that. But I think it'd be pretty cool for our Canadian viewers. So
yes.
All right, Justin, you go ahead. And is this now? While you're going over this, I'm going to ask you some random questions. Is this set up like you would run it for? Puff, or not puff, but for a hat and a flat? Or
this particular one, this is super generic, so I would want to add a few manual underlays, some global underlays, just to make sure that this ball is going to sew center out. Right now it's just a straight fill with a border and the stitches. So a couple of different things that I've kind of saved over the years, kind of an artistic home plate with an open side here. A full home plate that's completely filled in. Another kind of artistic one I've seen quite a lot through. A lot of these stock designs kind of, I think, come from stock vector art that you find online and whatnot. A lot of cool, simple one color stuff that can be used and utilized in different ways. This one here was kind of the one that I liked. It's cross bats with a baseball and the word baseball. So a lot of times it's really nice to have these designs that you can say that you can just drop in team names or school names and whatnot. Then you can kind of even get into mascots like the eagle head. You got the panther here.
And that's something I've noticed is a lot of like high schools, elementary schools, their art that they use is straight off of stock design sites, maybe not embroidery, but like stock vector sites. Because I've noticed that quite a bit especially as I've been seeing more and more of them. It's like that's pretty generic,
right? And years and years and years ago, when I got into the industry, it was like pretty much there was two major stock design companies out there. You went to Dakota Collectibles was one. There was another one I just can't remember the name right now, but it was like a catalog this thick. You could either buy the whole catalog and they came with in a bunch of floppy disks, or you can just buy individual designs. But a lot of times they were so widely used that it was really recognizable that it was like, oh, that's a stock design. I know exactly where you got that from. But like I said, there's so many outlets out there now that you can get stock designs. Holding on to designs, like I said, that may be something you custom digitize, but if there is something real generic in there that you can kind of save an element, of course, you don't want to reuse custom digitized designs that are owned by an individual, but a lot of times there is a real generic element that you can kind of save that you've already digitized. But yeah, it's I think they're all kind of derived from kind of the clip art genre. But I mean, you can take this and if you're a designer, or if you have a designer in house, and you can kind of come up with really, really cool designs. One of my customers, pretty much 99% of his work is schools and sports. So he does work with the designer. So he comes up with a lot of cool different designs for all kinds of sports throughout the year. So yeah, we can just go ahead and start with this real simple one. It's a baseball, as you can see here. It's about 1 3/4 inches. Something like this, because it is a native ENB format or Wilcom format, it's going to definitely be a lot easier to work with since I am working with Wilcom. If I were to come in here and want to make sure that this is going to be usable on a hat, right now, like I said, it is just kind of a flat fill. Actually starts from it's got a starting point at the bottom, ending point, at the top, ending point at the bottom. So I'll definitely want to change the start and stop points to make sure that it is so bottom up. And I actually will want to come in here and add some manual underlay to make sure that it does start from center out. And usually when it comes to circles or anything symmetrical, I'll start from the middle, work your way one way, back and forth, and center out. And when it is a circular design, I like to add a little bit of underlay around the perimeter as well, just to kind of help it keep its shape.
And one thing to notice, let me unmute myself. One thing to notice is he does have a really big inset on that to make sure that it's not going to be showing on the outside.
Exactly. Yeah, you have that curvature of the hat that you're working with, so you don't want anything going right to the edge, because if there is any shifting when it is embroidering, you don't want that underlay sticking out ever. So pretty much that, adding the underlay there, making sure my fill sews upwards. Typically my start and end point on an outline, I want to make sure that it kind of stays clear of here's my, I'll drop a guide here. Here's my center point right there on that dotted line. So, that's going to be the seam And depending on the hat style, you're going to have 5 millimeters on each side, maybe. That's going to be kind of your area of your seam.
I was going to tell you, it's a 3/8 inch wide seam.
Is it?
Yeah, 3/8. So yeah, what's that? 3/16. 5 millimeters, about a quarter of an inch out, which is a safe
spot.
Yep.
So yeah. I try to avoid any type of lock stitches that are falling on the seam, because especially with those dreaded 112s, you don't want to have those short stitches falling right on the seam. So typically I try to kind of do my start and end points kind of off to the side to make sure that it does get away from those seams. So once we know the actual design element is going to work on a hat, a lot of times sports designs will be going on hats. Kind of the genre of sports, you usually have kind of maybe the coach's polos, so it's going to be a left chest, but typically you can work your way backwards. If you know you're going to have a hat design it or digitize it for a hat, and it should work on a shirt, give or take different materials. But 9 times out of 10, sports is going to have some type of hat garment that's going to be going on. So adding lettering. First thing I do is, once I establish the design's going to work on whatever I'm going to be going on, I typically want to select the whole design, and you could either do that by clicking off to the side of the design, dragging and dropping a square on, and that selects everything in that window. Another way of doing it is, if you have your color object list open, you can click on the first color, hold shift down and click on the last color, and that will also select all of them. As you can see, they're all highlighted in the blue squares. That means they're all selected. And I believe there's also a select all under the edit, or Control A. Those are all 4 different ways of selecting everything that's on your screen. From there, I'm going to group it. And you can either do that by right clicking on it. And do they have group on here? I guess not. You can do, under arrange, you can do group. So it's all one piece. Or you can also do Control G, does the same thing. So what that does is to make sure that when you're working in your screen, and you're adding lettering and you're going to be moving things around, you don't want to accidentally go to grab the ball and you only grab the fill, or you only grab the outline and you start moving that around. So that's why I like grouping that object, so I know once I start adding lettering to it, it's gonna be easier just to move around and center and whatnot. So
I tried to use the keyboard shortcut to mute myself. This is not going well for me. Just to put out there, if you guys are watching on Facebook, and we're, from what I understand, we're experiencing some technical difficulties on Facebook, you can always jump over to the YouTube stream. Because as far as I'm aware, we're not having any issues with the YouTube stream. But if you guys are watching on Facebook and you're having problems with the stream coming through, I would just recommend jumping over onto YouTube. You can still comment there as well. That's my disclosure, not disclosure, statement on if you're experiencing some difficulties.
That's your 2 cents?
Yep, 4 cents.
Okay, so just something generic here. I'm going to use the word baseball, something that's going to be centered underneath the ball. One way to make sure that you are on 0, so everything's centered together. Here's a ruler that you can turn off and on. That's at the top, so your 0 is going to be at your center point. You could always drag and drop your guide. Also, when you select the object up here in position, if you're at 0, 0, that means it is centered. So if it is off, you can see that it does show how far off center you are. You can always just 0 that out. So when you're moving text around and centering things, those are the type of things that you could utilize to make sure that things are centered together. Also, another reason why I'm grouping that ball, if you are doing your lettering and you happen to just kind of put it out here and you're not sure exactly where the center is. If you select everything again and you have your aligning menu up, you can use the alignment tools where you can center them to each other.
Oh, that's a neat toolbar. I've always went up and done it from the arrange drop down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I have all my ranging and welding stuff down here. So, again, depending on how you select things in what order, it's going to center it to one or another. So, center it to each other. Again, kind of knocked it off zero from as far as the center, so you could always center that out. Another thing too, to make sure that you are utilizing everything you can do in Wilcom to make sure that this is going to run on a hat better. After you lay out your text and after you go in and set all your proper settings as far as your density, let's go with 0.36 underlay. I always just go with a center run when it goes to hats.
Quadruple tatami.
Quadruple tatami. So if you go into special here, this is where all your fonts and whatnot. I just used a college block, which is pretty basic for a sports team. If you scroll down here and you go to sequence, if you pull out that menu, you're going to want to go center out for a hat, of course. So you could actually choose that, and so the computer knows that it's going to do the letter that's closest to center, work its way out one way, come back, do the rest of the word the other direction.
Okay, wait.
Yes.
I had a question. It was under that menu. We'll go back. All right. So do you want to explain the difference between, because you've got your two center outs there and your inline there. If you want to just kind of explain the difference between those options that are there on the center out, the two different options.
Well, the two different options is if you wanted to go left or right first. So this is going to be your option where it's going to go to your right first. This option here is going to go to your left first.
Okay, and then the one with the 5 play buttons.
You know what? That's a good question. Do you know that answer?
I do. It's going to show the B and then the E and then the A and then the S.
Gotcha. So it's going to actually bounce back and forth. So instead of just doing your full right side and then your full left side, it's going to be bouncing back and forth evenly. I don't know when you would use that.
I would think if maybe you had your text had an outline. It might.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's an option to give you. It's got to be there for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of a basic way of just kind of throwing something underneath. If you wanted to add something to the top, you could always just. Oops.
And Justin, I just want to throw this out there. We did get a special request, and I don't know how much time you have and whether or not you can fit this in, but Sunrise Tactical Gear is asking basically how do you set up a team name?
Oh, okay. Let's finish up here. Let's do a little bit in Pulse, and then I'll hopefully we'll have a few minutes that we can go over that as well.
Awesome.
So when I'm adding lettering to make sure that everything's uniform, if it's the same font and stuff like that, I usually just like copying what I've done already, since this has all the format and the densities and the sequencing that I already have. And you could either do your Control C, Control V to copy. If you select something and you click on your right mouse button and drag and drop it, it'll also copy it. Again, selecting all, you're going to have your center things vertically, center it out. A lot of times,
one thing to be careful with this here is if you hit Control C and Control V, that you don't forget to move your text off the bottom one, because then your bottom letters will run twice.
Exactly, because I just actually had that. If you do Control C and Control V, as you can see, it did duplicate it there, but it duplicated right on top of each other. So yeah, if you do that and forget that you've already duplicated it, it's going to run and run again. So that is definitely a
oopsie. If you see that in your digitized file, You can know that the digitizer probably copied and pasted, and it was an accident. And
Exactly.
that's an edit request.
So I've done it.
I've done it too. That's why it's funny. We both.
Yeah, exactly. Couple different ways to curve. I'm just kind of going with a real generic, basic layout where it's kind of the curved lettering on top, bottom lettering. Couple different ways of arcing this to make sure that it does look good over the ball. You can go to, again, your special tab under your lettering, and under the baseline here, this is where it's going to be the free line, which is just standard, just a straight free line. A fixed line is to make sure that if you have an area you're trying to keep it in, it does give you boundaries as far as your width. I'm going to use the arc CW. Wow, that's weird. Wonder why I gave it that.
That's when you go into the node edit and adjust the arc, or maybe you could rotate it too, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just going to start from new. I don't know why I was giving that weird thing. So, new text, college font. Let's make it 10 millimeters tall. And now and it keeps doing it. If you're watching Wilcom, you got a glitch. I'm wondering what setting that is doing that on. That's why. I had it justified to the left, so it was arcing that way.
If you're watching this, Wilcom, Justin had it justified to the
if
left.
You're watching that was user error. Okay, so that's one way of arcing it. Depending on how much you want it arced on the ball, I think something like this, you don't always have to follow the exact arc of an object. I think that looks decent. It gives it kind of some balance where the lettering is similar on the. Let's give this a different name.
I totally just read that Tucson.
Of course you did. like most people that aren't from here. If you do want to change that arc position, you actually go into your setting again, and it's the radius that you want to change. So a smaller number is going to make that arc less. So it kind of arcs right along that edge of the circle. But a lot of times it is kind of, guesswork as far as changing that setting depending on how much of an arc you want to do. I usually go with something that's more pleasing to the eye. I don't usually try to go zigzag. Sometimes things can throw you off depending on if the word, how it's spelled, if there's upper and lowercase lettering. Fonts like Scripps, I think, look way off when you try to arc them. So you really need to play with it depending on the font you're using. So that's one way to kind of adjust that arc is under that setting. Another way of doing it is if you have a light straight setting, you can actually use, I can never find the envelope.
You can't find, it's an undershaping. Down one. Nope.
No.
It shows what features we use a lot.
Exactly. So actually, I just turned on the envelope tool here. If you right click on your tools, it'll show you everything that's available. Things that are checked are on, things that are unchecked are off. So I actually have my envelope tool is off. But one way of doing it is if you just don't want to do an arc on a line, you can actually do stuff that's a little bit more artistic. You could, when you add the envelope here, this bridge envelope, you can actually just change the arc of just the bottom of the lettering. If you click the bottom node here and hold down shift, you can actually, it'll do it evenly top and bottom as far as pinching and curving. If you hold down control, it'll arc the top and bottom evenly. So that's what I've known as a vertical arc, where it actually grabs the word and just kind of arcs it vertically, where it changes the arc of the lettering, but the lettering doesn't follow the contour of the arc. So it's a vertical arc where it just change it vertically. That's kind of a cool look. I like that look on sports types logos. Another envelope you can choose is what's this one called? Diamond, where it can kind of give you another type of arc where it's more of a straight arc, but different things you can do as far as to change it up. So it's not so generic where it's just a line of lettering straight top and bottom, or even just an regular arc lettering that you can utilize with the different sports designs. So I know we're about halfway through it. I want to make sure that we get some time in Pulse. So I'll let Jeff, I'll play with those team names behind the scenes here. And then the last few minutes, we'll take a look at that and touch on that as well.
Okay, hold please. Just one thing to note, Justin, if you scroll down there in the bottom of lettering, they have lettering art too, which throws a bunch of different envelopes for you.
Gotcha.
Because when you said, I don't know where the envelopes are, I started looking. That's what I found. And I'm going to load.
So while you're doing that, I'll pull up some comments here. I'd like to have both Pulse and Wilcom. I do. I like having the knowledge for the simple fact of, a big part of our group is for education. So we are actually all in the process of trying to learn Pulse a lot better. I know Jeff has more time on it than any of us. But the plan is for all of us to actually get more proficient in Pulse, so we can, teach across the board. A lot of it we try to do in theory, because not everybody has Wilcom, even though it's a real popular program. But that's a plus. And as far as my concern, I have different customers that may have Pulse and they're asking for native files. So it is a bonus to be able to give PXF files to those Pulse users, EMB files to those Wilcom users. So you got it ready to go?
No, but let's do this.
No. All right.
Oh, let me go ahead and click that button. So here I have Pulse up, and these are some of the designs, Justin. I've got designs 1 through 11. It's actually 12, but don't catch me on that. But these are the designs, some designs Justin sent over. And one thing I want to touch on is this is a DST file. So the colors are not necessarily what they should be. Now, I could spend a lot of time and I could select the different objects, and I could go in and I could recolor it to whatever I think it should be. But at the end of the day, when I export this file, it's going to give me a run sheet. And the run sheet is going to show me the order that it's going to sew in, and then I can pick the colors on my machine. So I don't necessarily have to match it, but it is something that people go ahead and do. So I picked this one because it was the first one that showed up. And let's go ahead and we'll take a look at it here. So this is this is about 2 inches wide and 1.93 inches tall. So if I was going to put this on a hat, I would do a left panel placement because I lean towards those in general. But if I was going to do this, my widest I could go was about a 2.5 inch. So I would need to look at something that's going to be that's going to work in that area. So I don't want to go too large a text. I have to stay under about 2.25 inch. So I can't really throw anything underneath it because that's going to take, it's going to be 1/4 inch tall text. And I would rather have something big and bold on a hat rather than something smaller. So in Pulse, I actually have it set up. So normally it has fly out menus. So a lot of these options are hidden, and I prefer to have them out where I can see them really easy. So if I wanted to do text, I can create a curve. I can do stepped, arced, circular, monogram, line angle, vertical lettering, rainbow text. So for me, just to create a simple line of text here, I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to do Control to lock it to the axis, and I'll go about right there. And it's going to want to turn, but I'm going to end the object, so it's going to be a straight object. And do that, and we'll hit enter, and there we go. So now we have a nice large text. This is, of course, going to be way too tall. I've got my text here at 1 inch, so I'll try a 1/2 inch, and we'll get it down there to about the size that we want to do. And now it comes down to, do I want to put it on the left side or the right side? So I think, honestly, that I would rotate this. Not a circular copy. I'm going to rotate it 180 so that we're now facing the opposite direction. And I'll just move it over to this side here. And there is a comment here. Sean Lee says, my first question is the colors. Every time they are wrong, but that is just because of the DST. Can we import under a different file? So DST files, they don't retain color information. Some file formats do, like PES. Justin can think of more, but PES is the one that comes to mind.
As far as generic files, I think PES is the only one. If there are other ones, I don't use them regularly, so I'm not sure if they hold that type of information. But unless it's a native file, PES I think is the only one that does.
All right, so there you go. I know like ZSK uses a transport code, and it can tell what the color is in every stop. So if I have 4 reds underlays and then it's alternating back and forth, I can just put in the one color and it'll recognize it all. But I'm going to go ahead and take all these segments here, and I'm going to group them into one, and then I can use the alignment tools here, so I can make sure that, here I'm going to make sure that they're bottom aligned, because the S of the Eagles is going to go a little bit higher. Now, if we want to get into some of the text options, if you double click on a text, it'll actually bring up your segment settings, and it's a lot bigger there's a lot more options in here that'll allow me to do. So I can italicize the text. Is that linking for you too? No? Okay. I can add some letter spacing to it if I want to. I can do some width compression. I can set a lot of that. My justification, I can go through and do a lot of the same settings that Justin did, as well as put it in an envelope. I can do a drop shadow on the text. So if I do an X offset of, let's say, 2.5 millimeters, and I hit apply, now I've got another text that's going to drop shadow out. And I can set that off both X and Y to give it just a little bit more dimension. So let's go at 2.5 on the Y as well. And now I've got a little bit of a drop shadow, which I think that's too much because it gets a little confusing over here. But that's something that I can do, and I can just remove the drop shadow very quickly. I can go into my baseline. There we go. And I can actually offset the text off of the baseline. So if I need to digitize a baseline along a curve, I can digitize the curve, and then I can say, okay, I want the baseline to be, I want the letters to sit up above that 1/4 inch, which is really handy sometimes, depending on your art. I've got my connections. I actually have this set at closest point, so I can do as digitized, where it'll actually trim on every letter, and it'll run the letter in the section that it was digitized, as well as the furthest point. I like to do the closest point because as it's sewing, I want the least amount of trims to go into it as I can. So I like to nudge my text just a little bit closer together to kind of hide those trims versus spreading it out and trimming on every letter. If I can kern it so I can get rid of that, it's going to give me a cleaner backside and a faster run time. And, when time is money, faster is better. So I've got my lock stitch length, and I can set my trims around locks, so it'll automatically set lock stitches around the trims, and I can tell it to trim. I can tell it the distance that I want it to go before it'll trim. So if my distance between my letters is greater than 3 millimeters, it's going to trim, and I can shorten that up. And I can actually tell it that I want it to always trim, so it'll trim on every letter and always lock stitch. And then I get my lock stitch type. And this is one of the things I really like about Pulse is not only do we have the line and the basic, but I have a diamond shaped line, a triangle, a V lock, a W lock, and a Z lock. And I can actually I can digitize my own lock stitch if I want for something different, which is nice. Because sometimes you get those weird objects that you need a different lock to do. I can also I can bury stitches when it's doing the connection between. I can tell it that I want it to drive a few stitches shorter. And I can set my connections inside of characters, which is a lot different. I can actually tell it I want it to trim between objects. I can do my drop cap first and last based off the baseline. I can set a fill in a border, so I can actually add it a border. I can tell it I want a 0.4, 1.2, and we'll just tell it I want that border, and I'll hit apply, and now you can see that it went in and it added a border underneath the text. So it'll sew the border, and then it'll sew the text on top of it, which is really cool. I can set my sew sequence like we talked about. This is going to go left. So it's going to start at the E and it's going to go left justified. So in this case, it's going to start at the bottom and go up because I turned the text on its side. I thought you had a question. I was ready.
Oh, no.
I can tell it to go center. I can center last or right justified. And I can tell it, if it's a 2-color font, color A, color B, versus letter 1, letter 2. And I can set the outline sequence, which is really cool. And then any special processing that I want, I can manage my offsets. I can pass through font auto cornering properties, which is pretty neat.
Real quick on that, it is important, especially on a hat, that sequencing, especially if you're doing a 2-color lettering. You'll definitely want to do, depending on what size your lettering is for registration purposes, and you don't have things misaligned, you'll want to do a couple letters at a time. You know.
And I can tell you I would run on this one. I would honestly run the whole word because it's narrow and it's vertical.
Yeah.
And I could be okay. But if I am running like a fully across the front of a hat, that's going to stop me from having registration issues. So,
right.
That's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at that. And then I can go into the underlay and I can set my underlay sections. And this is pretty neat too. Generally when I run a hat, I do a center run underlay. It's going to be, and this is set at sequence 5, but it's going to run first. If I put in any of these others, it's going to change the sequence that goes in. And I'm going to do a 2 millimeter stitch length because that's generally what I run. And then I hit the enter key and it applied everything. So I've got that at a 2 millimeter stitch length, and I'm going to do a parallel, which in will come as a zigzag, and I'm going to let it run the zigzag. So in this sequencing, it would run the zigzag first, and then it would run the center run, and I actually want it to run the center run and then the zigzag. So I just click off the use default sequencing, and I can tell it that I want this to run number 2, and I want this to run first. And now I've got the 2 separate underlays running in the direction that I want them to. I can dig down, I can go in, and I can set the number of lines. So if I really wanted a double underlay or a triple underlay of a center run, I could do that. I have never honestly needed a more than run once underlay.
No.
I was going to say, there's got to be a reason, but I didn't know if Justin had ever ran an underlay more than one.
And a lot of times these are features in there that these softwares put on there on if you need it type thing. But a lot of times they're hardly ever utilized. So, but they are, obviously there are times where the programmers felt that there might be a time where you need something like that.
Yep. I don't know when, but you might. Maybe in lace. I'll think about that. I might have done that in lace before. I can go in and I can override some of the stitch pattern. I can change the angle, and I can also run through some more of these objects. I'm not going to do that right now though, and we'll just go ahead and go like that. So if I'm running this from a hat and I'm going center out, bottom up, and I'm running it on the left panel. Of course, I want it to run this text first. So I'm going to move this ahead in the sequence, and they do that here in the segment, and I can go resequence, and I can say bring to the start of the design, so it'll run that first. And then I like to just play through the slow redraw and watch it run sometimes to make sure that I have it sequenced the way I want it to, and make sure that it's going to run in the order that I want it to. So this looks like it's sequenced okay, the way that is. And I never actually looked. It's 2.5 inches tall. So I'm going to want to bring that down to 2.25 inches. When I digitize for hats, there are some machines that can go 2.5 inches. There are some machines that can go 3 inches. It doesn't mean the hat can go that high.
Right.
Depending on the hat that you're running, and me and Justin talked about this the other day, depending on the hat that you're running, your sewing field is going to be limited. So when I digitize a design for a hat, keeping that in mind, I try to stay around 2.25 inches. If I know that somebody has a Brother machine, I'll go down to 1.9, because some of the, what would you call it, prosumer Brother machines, they have a hard limit in there and it can't be expanded. So you're set at 2 inches. It might be a little bit less depending on the year of
the machine
that you're running. So I do have a question here from Shauna Lee. What version of Pulse are you running? This is DG16. So it's the latest version. And currently I'm in Maestro, which is the top level, which is why I have a billion buttons. But the text functionality is here even in their lowest version. So you can access all that in the, I believe they call it the composer level.
And that's another thing to add too, depending on, what level of digitizing or editing that you do in-house. You don't, if you aren't planning on doing full digitizing for yourself or even for others, you don't necessarily need the full-blown version of these softwares. 9 times out of 10, the software is going to have different levels. The lowest level on most of those is some type of lettering program where you could at least do their stock fonts, where you can just grab a DST file or a stock design that you have and add lettering to a file. Some of those might have some ability to scale designs if it does have a stitch processor. There's other programs out there that have the modules that you can buy, just bits and pieces of the software itself, depending on what you want to do. Something like Brilliance is a huge popular one that has all kinds of different modules. So again, if you are kind of taking around the idea of what software you need or want, and you haven't bought something yet, and you don't want to digitize, a couple things to look at are that if it is something where you buy a lower level, can it be upgraded in the future? Can you add modules to it to do more and more and more? But if you are just starting off and you are just wanting lettering, and you have a digitizer digitizing the designs for you, that's something to look at, where you can just grab the one that just has lettering to do stuff like this.
Yeah, and I will say this, that everything I've done so far can be done in the lowest level of Pulse.
Yeah.
And I could open that up if I needed to, but I've been working in the lower level. And the 2 mid levels, I want to say, of Pulse, you don't have like sequence or boring or some of those other options or Chanel, right? Some of those options that you need only if you have a specialty machine.
Right.
So it's definitely worth looking at what you have and whether or not you want to upgrade. That some of the neater things that you run into when you're using Pulse actually comes if you're utilizing it with a Tajima machine, because you can do things like set the speed, you can slow it down, you can speed it up inside of the software. You can set some of the presser foot settings. You can set the material thickness. So there's a lot more options that you can get stuffed into your file that you send over, if you're utilizing a Tajima machine along with this. So, and there's some really cool options I wish I could play with, but I can't because I don't have a Tajima yet.
Oh, did you hear that, people? Did you hear the yet in there?
We'll see what happens. Yeah. So one of the things that you can't do in the lower level of the Composer software that you can do in the next level up, I do believe, is when it comes over to doing this bird. So like we said, we're going to want to do kind of an underlay that's going to go in and we're going to spread out. And Eric Campbell explains this really, really well when he says it's kind of like smoothing out a tablecloth. That's one that makes sense to me, where you're laying it out and you're trying to push it out. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're starting closer to the seam and we're trying to spread out the material away from the seam as we're sewing. And that's going to give us the best stability. So just like Justin did, I'm going to do kind of a zigzag, and Justin goes up and around, and I don't. Personal preference. I'm just going to go with that.
I mainly do that with the real symmetrical shapes, like a circle, just to kind of really lock down that hat and get it stabilized to the backing. Just because the circle is so recognizable that it needs to be perfectly round, that I'm just trying to really stabilize that hat.
Yeah, that really makes sense. This is, we'll see. So it did. I ungrouped, so I selected the group of objects, and I hit Control U and broke it into the different pieces here. And then I went and moved that back up to the front, because when I ungrouped it, it set it in front of my text, and I want to make sure that my text runs first. And that's really, it's something to think about as you're digitizing, is what's running first, what's running second, especially when you're trying to work your way from the center out or the bottom up. So that ran first, and then the next segment that comes up is going to be, it's set as an Eagle 16, which is white. It's going to be that eagle's face, and I want to make sure that I'm moving this object up before it. So I'm again going to go to segment, resequence, and I'm probably just going to move it to the start of the design, so it's above that, and then bring it down there. And now I'm going to turn off 3D view, and I'm going to take a look here, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that as this sews, and it's going to do the text, and you can see I ended there and it dropped down to right here. So if I go and I grab my object and I go into node edit, yep, there we go. I can grab my last node and I can bring it actually down close to where that ended, so that now when it runs, it's going to run that object, and then it's not going to be forcing it to trim. It's going to connect and run that, and then it'll do the trim after that object. So that's just me trying to make sure that I'm making a file that's going to do a good job, and it's going to run well and be sequenced well. And
yeah, you definitely, when you're adding elements like that, you definitely want to kind of make sure that the element that you're adding it before where that element's going to start, and that way you can end the element or the running stitch underlay, in this case, in the area that it is starting the next element, to make sure there isn't a useless trim, because a trim just going to slow down your machine and cause some delays on your production.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the actual time, the estimated time that it gives for trims. Some machines trim faster than others, but all machines are generally around, I want to say, like 8 seconds.
Is it that long?
Somewhere around there. If you start trimming if you have 20 trims in the design, that adds up.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start doing the design 100 times, that really adds up. Exactly. I've been able to eliminate a lot of time off of some of my files just by eliminating the trims. So I'm going to go back to the select tool. I'm going to double check, and I'm going to make sure that I have my density right here. So I just want to look at some of the features that it has. I've got my slant, my spacing. And one thing to note too is if you look up here, it also has my text, my height. It's got the font type, the slant, the spacing, the envelope. So when you digitize an object in Pulse, it gives you these options up here as well. So you don't always have to drill down into a menu. You can do it up there on the top, and I can even here, this button will do a trim and this button will add a lock stitch. But sometimes drilling down into them gives you more options. So I can actually go into a satin and I can see, I'm at 0.4 density. So I want to lower that to a 0.35, and I can just increase the density of that. And then for the outline, I should have hit the outline too, but There we go. And let's look at the fill and border, and the border density that I have right there is 0.4. So I can drop that down to 0.35 as well and make sure that I'm using an appropriate density for the hat and the outline and the center stitching. So I think that rolls through a lot of it, Justin, and I'm just checking the time here. We've got about 9-ish minutes if we want to hit over team names real quick.
Yeah, I'll jump on that real quick.
All right, so I will go ahead and pop off here.
All right, so
names.
I grabbed this kind of stylized home plate. I thought it would be a cool one. That team names are utilized that if you do want to run a design and then the name right afterwards. So you're just basically hooping once and calling it the design once. And you can kind of bring in a list of names, so you're not individually typing them, individually placing them on the shirt. A lot of times this helps where you can utilize running a design if you are running it on multi-head, turning off each head and doing an individual name on each individual head. If you are kind of running it on a single head as well, you can run the design, drop the name, run the design, drop the name. You just got to make sure that you're loading the correct sizes on the machine each time when you know your list of names. So
I know I have a question for you, Justin, because I'm genuinely curious now. I know on some of the newer machines they have head selection where you can actually set it in the file and it'll turn off heads 2 through 4 and run the first name, and then it'll turn off head 1 and then turn on head 2, and it'll go through like that. Is that something that the older Tajimas have as well, or is that just still something that's newer and you have to go flip them on?
I'm pretty sure that's on the newer models, so that is definitely a bell and whistle that you can have on the newer machines, but that does sound like a really cool aspect on those, just to kind of automate the system as far as team names. If you do look at your menu over here under your lettering menu, you have a little icon that has a red, green, and blue guy. That's the team name. So if you click on that, it will pull up this menu over here. You could either go ahead and just double click in here and names and add to your name list here. Name 1 would be if you are just doing, single names like first names. Name 2 if you want to add last names, maybe a number, sports number if you're looking to do that. But it's just a matter of going down and adding the names here. That's just the quickest way. If you pull up this manage teams, you can actually pull up teams and you can add names here. If you're doing first last names, you can do quick names where you can just list it here. So there's a couple of different ways as far as input.
So one of the neater input methods that's there is you can actually import a CSV file with team names.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
If you have somebody that gives you an Excel spreadsheet and you turn it into a CSV, you can import it.
Yes.
They do have a sample team names in there if you click on the import.
Yeah, so if you do import here, you can actually, depending on where you save it, it's either a text TXT file or a CSV. CSV is most common. Like you said, if you get an Excel file, you can just output it into a CSV. A lot of times that's good, so you can avoid misspellings, typos, and stuff like that. If someone's giving you a list, that's exactly how they spelled it, so you're going off exactly the spelling that they're given. That is definitely a nice aspect of that. Once you get your list as far as your names in there, you can utilize your regular settings as far as your text settings, height, densities, and whatnot. You can just kind of come in here and, I don't know why they automatically actually have them hidden by default, but I'm going to unhide because I actually grabbed just the one name, but you can select them all, change the settings and whatnot. G to generate stitches, because right then it's just an outline. but you can move them around, center them to what you're doing. Again, grabbing them, Control G to group them, make sure that everything's centered up. And the trick to team names as far as how you're going to save them. So when you output them is where it's going to give you the different choices as far as how it's going to save the individual files. So if you're going to output this into a DST file, when you go to options here, if you choose the DST, you go to options, it's actually going to give you different ways that it's going to save. It's going to design and team names with stops. So it's actually going to just be one file, and it's going to add a stop function after each name. So that's where it'll run the design. So if you are running an 8-head and you know you've lined up your shirts 1 through 8, and you have your list of names where it's 1 through 8, it's going to add a stop. So you can turn off all but one head. It's going to run a name. It's going to stop. Then you can toggle all the heads off and on as you go down the list. Or if you have one of the new machines, it sounds like they have the function where it'll do it automatically.
Or if you have a single head, it'll stop so you can change the hoop.
Exactly. Create multiple output files. Like if you are doing something where you're utilizing team names just to do a whole list of names, but you don't have a design, that's where it's actually where you can utilize your team names, and when you output it, it's actually going to output all the names individually. So that's if you are doing individual names on a single head or even on a multi-head, where you want them all done individually. Team names only with stops is going to be the same thing, where it's just the team name only. It's not going to have the design file. You can actually select your auto start and end where you're centering it. All these are going to be in your output. So depending on how you're doing the team names, that's where you're going to really utilize the grouping and the sequencing when you do the output. So.
All right, I read this comment and went completely silent, but Mike Moldo says, if you open the exported DST back up, 8 names means 8 colors. Still most likely set only one color on the machine.
Right.
And generally what it does is when it sends out the file, it sets a color stop in between each of them. And then when you go on the machine, you change it and you set basically all of them to the same color and it'll stop.
Right. Yeah. The most machines, multiple colors on the same color needle, it's going to put a stop in between. It's kind of a coded thing that the machine is going to recognize.
Yeah, and I know on one of my machines, I have to have a stop in the file, and then the other one I can set the stop on the machine. So it all comes down to setup. If you set it up right, it can be very, very handy. I did a lot of wedding napkins once they all had individualized sayings in the corner of every one of them. And I set it up with team names and all of them as different color stops, and was able to set it in one file and just sit on the machine and just change out garments. So it took a little bit more time to actually set it up. But then when it came down to running, it saved me so much time rather than doing an individual file for each one, setting it up. So,
yeah, as opposed to sit there and typing it, outputting it, saving it, whatever it is you're going to do, and then next, especially if it's the same font, same size, and everything that you're doing is the same, which is typically what happens when you come to individual names on an order. You can kind of set them all to the same function, set all the same settings, densities, underlays, whatnot, and just kind of say, all right, list is done, output it out. And depending on, like I said, depending on how you're running it, how it's on a machine, how it's involved in the design is how you're going to choose how it's going to save and output. So it's a cool little feature to have.
I was typing. All right, so guys, with that, I think that's pretty much going to sum up our live for today. As far as announcements goes, again, we are running the shirts. See, I pre-typed yeah, I felt good about it. So we are running the shirt sale right now, and again, that's going to be ran through Justin's company, and they'll be fulfilling that. Once the order closes, all the materials will be ordered and they'll be shipped out. But it's a good way to help support your embroidery nerds, as well as get some swag that you can show off, wear around. And I've actually had people stop me to take a picture of my shirt before. And that's kind of a neat feeling. So if you guys want to go ahead and jump in, you can get in on that shirt sale. We do it once a year and only once a year, as well as we don't reuse the design. So this is this year's shirt, last year is last year's shirt, and the first year is the first year's shirt. So if you're starting a collection, you need to keep it complete. But these are, we're trying not to reuse the design, and we have no plans to. If down the road we decide that we're going to do a stock design that we do every year, we may do that. But as of right now, they are all completely custom. We're going to run them once and then they're done. So jump in on it while you can, especially if you like the design.
Yeah, so they'll be on sale throughout April, just to make sure that everybody has time to place their orders. Once we get all the orders, that's when we'll do, collect them all, print them all at once, get them mailed out to everybody. But again, it's fun to have your collection, and it is to support the group and the expenses that go into it. So I know it's hard to sell decorated garments to a crowd of garment decorators.
Yep.
But again, it's more of just the way to support us, to show that you are in the group, and in wearing that embroidery nerd design out there in the public is kind of a cool thing. The design, the logo itself is the same as last year's, but it is a little bit different, where we went to the faux stitch look of the design for this year. And then we did throw in one different option out there is on one of the hoodies. There is a sleeve option, one that has the OG embroidery nerd logo, which is on the front of Jeff's shirts there. It is going down the sleeve, so that is an option. So,
all right. So just keep in mind that will be closing here. And I'm trying to think if there are any other announcements. I don't think that there are. But I guess I'll go ahead and close this out, unless you have anything else you want to add in there, Justin.
No, I think we're good.
All right. Well, that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We're both here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.
Good night, guys.